Hello, today's lecture is going to be about research. And to me, the definition of research is pretty straightforward. It's gathering information. Now, there's two ways to gather information. One is meta-research. Meta-research is basically the research you're probably familiar with already. Somebody else has already gone out there and gathered the data for you. For example, if you needed to know what the population of Indiana is, you wouldn't start by going, okay, there's me, that's 1, my wife, that's 2, my 2 kids, that's 4. You don't do that. Someone else has already done the research for you. You just gather someone else's information. And the answer for that happens to be 6.7 million, a little more than that, but in round numbers, 6.7 million. I didn't count all those, people in Indiana. I went to a website, it gave me the answer, question answered. Most of the research that you're probably familiar with is this type of research. Somebody's gone and they've Googled something, they've maybe went to the library and picked up some research of other people, but they didn't actually go out and perform some kind of study. They didn't go out and do the research for themselves. They gathered it together and then presented it. Nothing wrong with that. It's how most of us do research. But inside of academia, and by academia I mean the type of studies that your professors are doing that are done at universities. That's what I mean by academia. Inside of academia, that type of research is kind of frowned upon. The idea is that when you do research, you're adding to this body of knowledge that's already out there. You're not just regurgitating the body of knowledge. So, that having been said, nothing wrong with meta-research. Perfectly good. You can find valid facts out there. As we have learned recently, there are alternative facts, and when you are looking for sources for information, try to find the most valid source possible. Google's a great place to start, but there is also something called Academic Google. It's one of their apps. Use it, and what they basically do is they give results for research that is original research, which we'll talk about in just a second. And academics, documents, data, studies, things that come from a .edu site rather than a .us site or something like that. It's going to be as valid as possible. As far as news sources, you need to know that usually newspapers are like the first draft of history, they used to say. Once again, in today's climate, there's, how do we say it and say it nicely? There's certain news outlets that are less than fair and balanced. So, keeping that in mind, some good sources for fair and balanced reporting would be like the Associated Press. Good source for information. Another good source for information is the Wall Street Journal. Usually above politics, above partisanism. So, good sources for information there. I tend to go to the Associated Press first. If they're not reporting on it, I might not need to be concerned about it. So, okay, original research, on the other hand, is research that is new. You're finding new information. It's not information that necessarily has been collected by someone else. You may be redoing a study that is exploring the same area, but you're trying to find something new to add to this body of knowledge. So this type of research is actually created or conducted by the researchers themselves. This is the type of research that your professor should be out there doing. Try to think of an example. One that I was involved in when I was at South Carolina. The researchers, including me, were trying to find out that have the number of female sources increased as the years have gone by. The theory was, or hypothesis, that as women take positions of power, they'll be quoted more and become sources in newspapers. It makes sense. So we looked at how many females were sourced, how long their quotes were back in the 70s, and then compared that data to the late 90s. That's when I was in graduate school. So we compared the two, and you thought, well, the number should go up. What we actually found is the number didn't go up. Actually, the number went down. So even though more women are in position of power, they're being quoted less and they're being used as sources less. And to have found that out, well, it would take researchers to go out there and actually do this kind of study to find that kind of data. What we did with that paper next was we submitted it to a journal, and that is an academic journal. And what they do then is they send out the paper that we wrote to other professors that are knowledgeable in this area, and that's called a peer review. And if those who have reviewed it think it's a valid study, that there's no mistakes in it, that what you went out to study is what you studied, and what you measured is what you measured, they'll approve it, and then the different journals will decide if it gets published or not. So the best type of original research out there is peer-reviewed research that is usually published in a journal or as some sort of article presented at a conference, something along those lines. And of course, all journals aren't created equal. There are some that are leaders in their field, and there are some that, I wouldn't want to be published in them. So, look for the most reputable source once again. And this information that they gather becomes the data that the meta-researchers use. So when you do a academic Google search, you may come across, well, the paper I just mentioned. It would be really easy to come across it if I told you who the first two authors were, but I'm not going to. But I know it's out there somewhere, so maybe I should find it someday. I should do some meta-research. Under original research, there are two different areas that you can look at. There's quantitative research and there's qualitative research. The simplest way to break this information down is quantitative research deals with numbers. You're going to be counting numbers, gathering numbers, creating numbers. It's, more science-y, if that's a word. This is what you'll see your psychology majors doing this type of research, chemists doing this type of research. Now, qualitative, I always thought I would become the next great qualitative researcher because I was toward that side, both with my master's degree and with my doctoral education. And you can look under what I have on qualitative there, and you can see, there's a lot of journalism type things on there. But anyways, let's start off with quantitative research. The most common, I believe, type of quantitative research is surveys. What surveys do is tell you what public opinion is. Is it accurate? Well, it depends on the science behind it. If you gather information from a good sample that has been collected in the correct scientific way, meaning that it's a random sample of a population where all members of the population are represented, and it's not weighted in any way, it's a good solid sample, you're going to get good solid survey results, and it will tell you exactly what the people are thinking. Now, does it prove anything? No. It can only tell you what people's opinions are, and that could be important in creative advertising, because you want to know what people's opinions are of different things, and you can go out there and do surveys. Within the scope of this class, I think you can do a survey. You may not get really good results because you probably can't get that really accurate scientific sample that you want to get, but we call quick little surveys, like going out and just doing one in the mall or doing it in your class itself, we call those surveys of convenience. and yeah, they're fun, but you can't stand behind it and say, and this is the truth. No. If you've done it accurately, you usually see survey results will have what they call an error, ERROR, and then it'll say plus or minus 3. That's the best you can do statistically to show that what you are reporting is measuring what people's opinions truly are. So just doing everyone in the classroom, it's not a good population. It's people who are smarter because they're in college. Depending on the area it is, it may be skewed towards a certain demographic. So yeah, surveys, they're fun to do. Scientific surveys, you have to really take classes, know how to do a good research survey, and then you can stand behind the results and say, yes, 100% of Americans love Oreo cookies. It's probably up there, but can't do that just talking to people in the hallway. The next thing is a content analysis. That's counting things, and that's basically what we did with that women as source study that I did in South Carolina. We went and we counted the number of sources that were used on the front page of a certain newspaper. We did a random sample of different times of the year to take that front page and compared it to a random sample of a different year. So content analysis, counting things, counting occurrences of things. One example that always pops to my mind is counting the amount of violence in cartoons. Yeah, that was a big content analysis, back in the 70s and 80s, especially in the 80s. And it turns out that, cartoons are very violent, especially, old Warner Brother cartoons. Even like Disney cartoons and along those lines. But they're cartoon violence. We really don't think Wile E. Coyote, took off on a rocket and blew up and all that other good stuff. But it turns out that when we do that type of research, it shows that, it's very violent. So what our government did is said, okay, we got to cut that down, and that's why we got programs like Care Bears and Smurfs, things that don't have any violence in it. And that came out of content analysis. Content analysis can show certain things, but once again, it can't prove anything. Content analysis can't prove that violent cartoons make violent kids. You just can't. But you can say, there are a lot of violent cartoons out there. And you can also say, there are a lot of violent kids out there. You can make a corollary, but you cannot show causation. All right, let's talk about showing causation. Experiments. Experiments are where you have two different groups. You have an experimental group, a control group, and then you manipulate a variable. It's called the independent variable. And the experimental group interacts with that independent variable. The controlled group does not. And then you compare the results. For example, a very famous experiment was the Bobo doll experiment. And what they did there was they had kids go and play with all these different toys. And one of the toys in there was a Bobo doll. Basically, it's an inflatable clown with sand in the base. So if you hit it, it bounces back. The experimental group, an adult would go in there and punch the Bobo doll and then leave. The control group, no adult went in there. The kids just played along. And what they were looking for is acts of violence. After the adult went in there and punched the clown, did the kids punch the clown too? And the answer is yes. They were shown how to play with this toy. You play with it by punching it, so they followed that. And the control group, the kids didn't punch the toy because they had never seen this toy before and they didn't know how to interact with it. They might push it, they may, run into it, but, they weren't punching it. So what they concluded was, the scene of violent acts make violent kids. It's more, along the lines of, kids copy what their adults around them do. So the experiment did show that, yeah, the independent variable did have an effect. An adult going in there and punching the Bobo doll had an effect on the kids. What was that effect? That's open for debate. Okay. Quasi-experiments. In experiments, you control the independent variable. You control that adult going into the experiment. Quasi-experiments is when you can't control it. It just happens. For example, 9/11. I happen to have done a content analysis of hate sites on the internet. And this was, back in the mid-90s, not so to speak. It was about the mid-90s. And, I could tell you at the time, what hate sites were out there, what they were trying to do. Were they trying to recruit members? Were they not trying to recruit members? Were there contact information on these sites? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And what they hated. That's always a fun thing. Strange things people can hate out there. And then 9/11 happened. Now, I didn't cause 9/11, at least I don't think so. But then I could go back and look at the same hate sites after 9/11 and see if there was a change. Are there more hate sites? Are they more rabid in trying to recruit people, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? I didn't set that up. The independent variable happened because the independent variable happened. But it's still an experiment. I can show you before and after. Now, there is no control group. There's not a group out there that didn't know that 9/11 happened. If they're, have a hate site out there. But what I found out is, no, there wasn't a lot of change, before or after 9/11. The hate didn't become more. It didn't become less. They didn't try to recruit anymore or less. They actually aren't recruiting. They're just spouting hate. So that was a quasi-experiment rather than an experiment where the researcher controlled the whole process. All right, that's quantitative research, numbers. Qualitative research doesn't have anything to do with numbers. The big joke among qualitative researchers is the only numbers we have are the page numbers. It's not a great joke. Historical research falls under this. Personal observation. And there's some personal observation stories out there that are a lot of fun. George Plimpton was big into this, and he wrote a book called Paper Lions. Paper Lions. And what he did there is he joined the Detroit Lions NFL team. He was like a third-string quarterback. And he did that so he could write about what it's like to be in an NFL team. How else are you going to do it? You can do a survey, you can do interviews, you can do things like that. But, to get that real insider's look at what's it like to be an NFL player, he became an NFL player. He actually, played a couple of downs and wrote about it in his book. So you can see how that's not really experimental. It's not, controlling variables. He just showed up. So, fun type of research. Took a whole class in this type of research, and yeah, that's fun kind of stuff. Journalism type of stuff. There's something called non-intrusive type of qualitative research, and that would be like going through someone's trash and, making assumptions about the people who threw out the trash. You're not interacting with the subject themselves. You're reacting with this component that won't affect the person that you're trying to find information about. So it's called non-intrusive data collecting, if you really want to get to that. Other things that fall under this category would be like looking at the scuff marks on carpet in front of art exhibits and using that to tell you which one is the most popular exhibit at your museum. You're not interacting with the people. The people don't even have to be there. You see how the carpet is worn out or not. So, interesting ways you can do research. Focus groups, this is in red because this is something that advertisers use all the time. And when I teach this class face-to-face, we actually do a little focus group. I bring in a product, divide up the class, come up with questions, and then we try to use that information that we got from the focus groups to actually come up with some ideas. So focus group is exactly what I just said. You bring in people and you have them look at a product, try out a product, sample a product, then you ask them questions about it. Sometimes the data is collected through a one-way mirror. That's not necessary. Although we do have a place like that on campus if you go over to the business school. But just taking notes while you're there, that's just as fair as if people are secretly watching or not. So definitely something that you can use for this class. Interviews you can definitely use for this class. Let's say we're trying to sell a certain type of car. Ask people about their experiences with this type of car, and maybe something that comes out of that interview sparks an idea that you can use creatively toward a campaign. But you know what interview is. You're asking people questions. Case studies is when you look at a event and describe it and debate it, discuss it, and all those kind of things. It doesn't really fall under advertising, but I suppose you could do a case study, as our book does, on different campaigns and see what worked and what didn't work. So I don't know how useful that is with actual product, but see how people have done this in the past. I guess that's solid. Within talking about this, I've already changed my own mind. And ethnographies, that's could be anything from doing your own personal history to doing the history of certain peoples, certain cultures, etc. It's more towards the history and interviews than say a survey. I have seen somewhere where a focus group was actually used to do an experiment. It's a fun experiment, so I'll quickly go through it. They had one group of people come in and answer a survey. Gets back to the survey. And one group just sat in a room, took the survey, turned it in. That's it. The other group, the group that was being researched upon, in the room with them was a chair that had a doctor's coat on it. And what they were looking for is if people felt more intimidated with that doctor's coat being in the room or not. And it turns out, yes, they are more intimidated. And by the survey they asked, they could tell by the questions that were asked if these people felt more intimidated or not. And it's kind of interesting, playing with people's minds. But it combined the idea of survey with experiment with focus group and our expectations of all those things. So that's my lecture on research. Your homework assignment will be doing some meta research on cookie companies, because I'm always kind of hungry when I do this class face to face, and even right now I'm kind of hungry too, and I can definitely, I've never met a cookie I didn't like. So go do some meta research, hopefully get some historical information, maybe even personal observation. Try some cookies out, say it's for school. And what I want you to do for the discussion is think about what information that you collected stood out from the rest of the information. Maybe it was about how old the company is or how new the company is. Maybe it's what other products this company makes. Maybe it's the scandal that this product has had in the past. Who knows? I don't know what you're going to run into. I have a good idea what you're going to run into, but go out, do some meta research, and then do the discussion question. And this should be a fun assignment, because they're all fun assignments.